Welcome to another episode of Black Belts and Boardrooms. I'm Amir Khwaja alongside my co host here, Renard Henry. And this is the show where we sit down with leaders who have earned their stripes through their craft, through their discipline, and through the work. And today, I'm excited because we have somebody who can actually say they've worked at a hyperscale level leading some very important functions. Renard, would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that. I feel like we're gonna talk a lot about security for some reason.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, without further ado, our guest today is Mr. Aftab Banth. Aftab, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat and learn a little bit more about you guys. Be fun.
Yeah. Now, Aftab, there aren't too many people who can say they've really handled cybersecurity at a global level, right? So you're one of those few peoples who can actually make that claim. And I know it looks different, but we'll get into that in a second. But what fascinates me about you is, you're somebody who has truly been intentional about their career and then not intentional also at the same time. You describe following problems, you describe, you know, just really being intentional about, helping. Um, Talk to us a little bit about that. Like why are you in cybersecurity and what really drew you into it?
Yeah, thank you first and foremost. Appreciate that because it is a bit of a contradiction, right? Being intentional and then just following where life takes you. But there's some deep rooted things in that, and we can talk a little bit about why that shapes out. But I think the reason I got into cyber was I wouldn't say an accident, but like you follow problems, at least for me, and then the problems will lead you to areas that invigorate you, pique your curiosity. And then, I think you highlighted another characteristic that is core to my ethos is just helping. So, you follow the problems, you get to the problems in an organization, and then you find out the people who are solving it could always use an extra pair of hands. And so, the nature of just wanting to help, not just your team or the adjacent team, but just help human beings in general. So that's was the driver of it. You know, we were doing cyberish stuff. This is 15 years ago or so, where cyber isn't what we think of it today, and we just started uncovering more and more areas that potentially could be affected the business, and different teams owned them, and we just showed up. My team, myself, just showed up and said, "Hey, we think we can help here. We think we should be doing this." And obviously, they were drowning in just the operational stuff already, and so naturally, you find yourself helping. And then one day, our CIO at the time pulls me aside and says, "Hey, there's been a huge breach, one of the largest breaches at the time for our competitor." I don't want to say, I don't want to use the exact words that he said, but he's like, "Don't effing let that happen to us." Okay, done. Let's go. So it was a little bit. It was. I think that was even though I was doing cyber work ish before that, that was my formal like. Okay, I would call myself. That was the inflection moment, and I just been running ever since. But it's been fun.
That's amazing. So, problem solver who loves to help people,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is that how we should think about it?
Yes, and the problem solving, and I don't wanna it's gonna sound, but it's just selfish, like, I just enjoy it. So, the problem solving portion of it is just me, um, fulfilling my own personal need, and then naturally, it leads you to places where you find yourself in rooms where folks can use help, and then, I just love human beings, love being around them, love learning from them, love so that and then naturally, there's chaos. People are there trying to put the chaos out, and you become one of those people, and it just works out. It's a very beautiful combination.
That's amazing. I'm reminded of something a lot of us say. We want every day to feel like we're not working. We're passionate, and it doesn't sound like you feel like you're going to a job every day. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there are moments and days where your days are all meetings, and I have strong opinions on how many meetings a human should do in a given day. But yeah, for the most part, it's enjoyable because I index on humans. I really, they're the function that make everything go. And yeah, it's enjoyable. And I think as I've gotten further in my career, I've gotten a chance to really influence them more, not just on a professional level. Because I think that's the easy one. Like I can tell folks, hey, in Project X, you did this. Maybe you should do that next time, or you need to be more intentional about your time. How you allocate your time, etc. But the one that I enjoy the most is how do you make humans better, like family people? How do you make them better friends? Wives, husbands. Like those are the conversations that I really relish in. And I've learned. I don't know if this is um, controversial statement, but people are struggling emotionally and mentally, and so you find that when they do can find some solace at the office and clarity, it it's a relief for them. So, and again, selfishly, I enjoy it. I really, it really settles a place in my heart to do that. So, yeah.
I love how you're pulling that thread of people a lot, and that's something Renard and I get into quite a bit. So this podcast really is part of that reason for us is we want to be able to surface those types of conversations. Now I'm going to push back a little bit and see how
Yeah.
you react to this question.
No.
Somebody could argue that, hey, Aftab, you've done a lot, you've been successful, and it's easy for you to talk about people and making them better and so on. Now, this is not a judgment statement in any way. How would you direct a mind that might be having those kinds of questions and struggles? Because a lot of us, for example, will tie our identities very strongly to the work we do or the kind of career we shape. And arguably, you and I sitting in a conversation like this or and Renard, we would say that keep your identity flexible or thin. How would you respond to somebody like that? Because there is a lot of layoffs, for example, in the tech industry, and you're part of that tech industry too. Guide us through how you, as a leader, as an empathetic leader, would show up to a conversation like that.
To unpack that for me, Rex, I love the pushback, but I want to make sure can you, is there critique? How does someone do that at a different level versus, or is there critique? How does someone going through some of these challenges themselves then help others? I want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah, somebody who's going through the challenges
Yeah.
right now, because again,
Yeah.
like I said,
That's a good point.
we're comfortable in where we are today, for example, and somebody could push back against us in that way that you can make these kinds of commentary because you are comfortable. So,
Mm.
with the intention of helping someone, how would you address who might be, having that kind of a mindset?
Yeah. So great question, and I don't disagree with it at all. Actually, like hey, you're sitting on your corner office, like you don't know what the start, and so I get that, and to a large extent, I empathize with it. I think for me, the way I would rationalize it is this: it's not a helping people because it benefits them in their career. It's just an ethos in life, and you don't have to be perfect at it. Like I'm sure you'll find a ton of people who say, "Hey, Aptav's the worst human in the world," and maybe our interaction at that moment in time wasn't ideal, or they walked away with something that is unfavorable. I think for me, and the way I would coin it to them is like, at the end of the day, when you sleep at night, like what are the things that matter to you, right? So you have a right, and so at that moment in time, what do you think about and why? And I like to believe, and I strongly try to live my life this way: is that when the lights are on and everyone's sleeping, and I'm to my thoughts and myself, what I want to achieve is some level of internal peace, right? And in order to do that, I can have a horrible day. Maybe I am laid off, or maybe I had a really bad project, right? But those things become less impactful if there's other portions of your life or your existence that provide you such outside benefit that it'll mask it. And I'll give you a very, very tangible statement that I think helps. For the most part, in our life, we are a function of a system that we want more from something than we give it, right? So I'll give you a very generic example. If you invest $100 in a stock, right? Most of us want 100 plus something, right? We want more from this stock than we gave it, right? If an employer hires you or me, they're going to say, after Bernard and Amir, they're going to generate X in value, but but we're going to pay them Y. right? And so in everything, for the most part, everything is a function of what can I get more out of it than what you put into it. But if you really think about your life, at least for me, the things that really settle me and provide peace are those things that I give more than I give back. And that's, I think, a very good mental framework to build upon, right? So I have $3. I mean, the amount of effort, time, resources I'll give to them. I'm not saying they can't ever pay me back, right? But it's a very different level of payback, right? And so the human portion of it, it's not a one-to-one thing, right? It's, hey, even in your most darkest of moments, and I'll give you a very tangible example that I went through if you guys are open for it, but most dark of moments, they're not gonna go away, but if you have this philosophy or this internal thinking that, this is what's important to me because it puts a calmness to my existence, I've seen that for myself and folks that I've shared that with, for it to resonate. And then, why that's important is because then you become the controller of your own quote unquote North Star, right? And that's a bigger power than people realize. Like if you realize that, hey, I'm judging myself with X, even though the world may be judging by Y. And then once you have that control and that level of comfort and confidence, it unlocks a lot. And so, sure, you're right. If you are going through some challenging time, it's hard to help others. But I would challenge that a little bit to say, like, if you truly believe in this framework or a similar framework, then those moments don't become as dark.
Yeah. Man, I like that. Like that. Makes me think a little bit of jujitsu and taekwondo, etc. How we mirror that so much, and it's really more about people in peace at the end of the day. But I'm curious. You have been head of security, a CISO, etc. You picked one of the most hated positions in tech for a lot of people, but you also picked one of the most sought after
Yeah.
people for businesses now with the age of AI. I'm kind of curious, who were you at an IC level before you became the person who was a CISO, et cetera, and leading other people?
Well, I was just a curious engineer. To be brutally honest with you, like, I was always, um, I don't know, like, I grew up, you know, my dad was a very heavy-handed kind of personality, and so, and then my mom is the complete opposite. She's very reflective and soft-spoken, and so I saw my dad's approach to life, and I appreciate it. His firmness has really helped drive a lot of my, I want to use the word success, but the path that I was ultimately able. But I think I really admired my mom, for her outlook and the way that she dealt with us, and she was pretty curious, I would say, with us. Like, why did you do that? Or you made this decision. Help me understand it. I taught you X, but you did Y. Like, let's navigate that, and that carried on to my career. I mean, the curiosity leaned from there because also, there is a heavy-handed approach, which again, I'm not saying I fundamentally disagree or it's a bad approach. For some folks it works, but I was just drawn to my mother's viewpoint on things. And so as I'm early on in my career, you're in tech, you're like, okay, there's an outage. Okay, we fixed it. Well, why? Do we understand? Even though, you'll do an RCA or the P2 or P1 is over, I'm like, no, 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 I need to understand this. Like, and then I used to keep a diary of all that's probably around here somewhere, of all the RCAs that we did and what I learned from it. But more importantly, what I missed, right? Like, I thought this was the problem, and then it was actually this. Like, where was my thinking? And so that's who I was, and I think the curiosity portion of it really led me there.
I think you hit on a point a lot of people forget what RCAs are actually made for and why they are. A lot of people, they fix the problem, they put a RCA out, but they don't take the time to say, okay, we found this. How do we stop this going forward?
Right,
And
right.
what the root of an RCA is, and I've seen it before where people just want to get that out, and but why did this happen? Then all of a
Right,
sudden,
right.
no one has an answer for it, etc. But like we're going back to now that you decided you wanted to go into security. I'm curious from your standpoint, and I may or may not know the answer from you. Do you feel from a CISO lens, is the security, is it trying to make sure the tech is secure, or is it trying to stop the end user from causing the issue?
So early on, it was, my understanding, my limited understanding early on versus I think my clarity today is different. So I think early on, it was all about like, okay, security needs to stop stuff. It's a very broad thing, but we need a firewall, we need an endpoint, we need to block this. And so like coming from a technical background, like it was really much the North Star was that. And then as I've grown and as I've seen a number of different, I would say, a variety of different organizations and scenarios, um, I learned that security is about trust, and so then you unpack that. There's technical trust, there's emotional trust, there's business trust, right? There's a like so trust has a characteristic that then can overlap a lot of areas of the business. And so I always highlight like, security is a trust builder. We just use the word security because it's the vernacular, but at its core, you're you're building trust. Like, you log into our system, you can trust that you're safe. You give us your data, you can trust that we're going to be good stewardesses of it. You do business with us, you can trust that we hire the right people and there's enough guardrails in place that we're not going to put you at risk. So um, that's what I've learned, and if I think if you can frame security in that regards, then the solutions and the way the teams interface with organizations differs, right? It's okay. I'm here to just help you build more trust. We don't have to be 100%, but if you're an engineer building something, if the trust is 1, can we get to 2 or 3? We don't have to go all the way to 10. Or if you're like in HR, right? How can we build additional trust in the processes and the systems that you are putting in place, right? So that's how I've grown dramatically, and it's helped frame a lot of the way I interface with folks and in the way we build programs. And we keep that as like, hey, this is our North Star.
Yeah. I always say that we're not trying to hinder the business, we're just trying to make sure we protect the business at the same time. Like, we
No,
want you to do all the great things you wanna do. We want you to bring all these tools in, but we have to protect the business at the same time. So, it's not that we don't want you to do your job, we just gotta make sure we're not gonna, be on calls for 3 days trying to fix an issue at the same time. So, it just changes. So, I wanna switch a little bit because of course, like I say, we're on a podcast. Me and Amir are podcast hosts. You are one as well with the CISO Circle. I would love for you to just talk about the podcast, why you developed it, and why we need the CISO Circle.
wow. So this is a so if I'm being honest, originally I was very hesitant to do it. By if it wasn't for my wife, like I think my persona would be not different, but it would be more covered. Uh, I'm naturally like my ideal state is uh, put in a hard day of work, go home and just read a book and spend time with my family, and then I always use the word, you know, people forget about you, and I think there's tremendous amount of peace and like beauty in that, and so for me that was my I would say thrust for the bulk of my life. A lot of my close friends will always, and I've had to mm, evolve from this. Would always share, hey, they call me Tab. They're like, Tab, man, you never share what's going on in your life, or you're pretty. It's not that I'm guarded. It's just that was naturally the way I was. So I got an opportunity. There was a gentleman reached out to me and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this podcast. We think you'd be a great host. And I was like, okay. So we get on a call and I spoke with him. And initially I was a bit hesitant. Actually, I was going to say no. So casually, I told my wife, I said, Jay, interesting thing happened to me. And I kind of shared it with the story. And I said, I'm probably not going to do it. And she just rolled her eyes. She's like, whatever. She's like, and she just walked away. I was like, okay, I figure she's just having a bad day or something. So, anyway. um, so a few days later, I'm washing the dishes and have my headphones on, podcast stuff, and she walks by. She tasked me. She's like, for someone who claims to be spiritual, intellectual, intellectually curious, philosophical, and try not to be a hypocrite. You're like the biggest hypocrite right now. So your boy had to turn the thing. I was like, "What are you talking about? Hypocrite?" She's like, "So you got an opportunity to." Well, she first thing she said, "You, what are you doing right now?" I was like, I'm watching the podcast." She's like, "And you got a chance to do a podcast, and you said no." I'm like, "Okay, what's hypocritical about that?" She said, "Well, why are you watching the podcast?" I said, "Well, I'm enjoying it. I'm learning some stuff." She goes, "Exactly." And this is where you really appreciate, even though I wanted to anyways. It's like, dude, you're frustrating me, but it's so beautiful to have a spouse or a partner in life who can be honest with you. She said, imagine if that person's podcast you're listening to felt the same way you did and everyone else did. How many podcasts would there be in the world? It's like, man, you got a point. I didn't want to say that to her at the time, but she was right. And so that's what drove me to just do it. And it's been fun. Like, look, I was super scared, didn't know what to expect. There's a group, they're called Sweetfish. They actually produce the podcast, and I happen to just be a host on it because, I mean, as you guys know, running a podcast is not easy. And I told them, look, I can show up. We could record these episodes, but with my schedule and my travel at the time, there's just no way. So that's the way it happened. It was really enjoyable. Hopefully, folks had got a chance to gain something from it, and it was supposed to be fun. I think we could have looking for ways to make it more enjoyable and laugh because at the end of the day, smiling and laughing has a healing component to the soul that I feel very strongly about. So that's the story. Share some nuggets of wisdom here and there, I guess. But for the most part, if you laugh, walk away laughing. I think we've reached our goal.
Hmm. It was it. I watched some of the episodes. Of course, it great podcast. I think you did great, and it is true. Like everyone gets nervous. I remember when Amir asked me. I asked my wife. I have a wife who's honest with me, and
Yeah,
and I'm grateful for that. At the
sure.
same time, and she was like, "No, you need to do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do it." I was like, I don't know. I was like, "Who the hell wants to listen to me talk?" That was my answer to her at first. Like, who the hell wants to listen to me talk? So,
Yeah.
yeah, now we're in our 2nd season now, so I'm grateful, for being able to do this podcast. I'm grateful to have a wife that
Yeah.
that can be honest with me and tell me, sometimes you gotta do some uncomfortable things in order to get to where you need to. So I feel the same way. Amir, what do you think?
Well, I love the fact that Aftab just admitted on our podcast that his wife was right. Aftab, the first advice I got, when I got married was happy wife, happy life, and I can't forget it, because it has been the magic recipe to a successful marriage.
It is so
See,
true.
I would say this. He's told me that before, and I say, "I don't believe it." I say, "You both gotta be happy.
Yeah, yeah,
Both y'all got it just can't be one-sided. We both gotta be happy together." I said, "Now if we both happy, then it's even better than just one-sided. Just can't be one side happy, gotta be both."
man. It's funny you say that, Bernard. I was asked to give a talk at someone's wedding. One of my friend's sons got married. He said, "Can you say a few words?" I said, your uncle will always help out, no problem." But I did highlight that. I said, happy wife, happy life, happy husband, happy life. Like
Mm. We both gotta be happy.
we like to have a few days and we smile. It can't always be
Yeah.
that.
You can't be one side miserable, the other one just, like, happy, like, that's not how it works. You both gotta be happy at the end of the day, so
But I will say this, and um, and I think I've grown to really appreciate this. Like our happiness comes from different places, right? And I think that's the one thing that I've learned, particularly in marriage, is that my wife loves to cook and loves to like her love language is like, I guess, acts of service. And by the way, I'm just learning this love language stuff. So, but so that makes her happy, and then in return, like I'm really happy when her like I can do things for the girls in a different way. Like I don't necessarily need them. So I think that's where I've evolved and learned specifically. Like she's happy. It's great if she's happy because I've got a bunch of these things in order for us that fulfills my cup. And I really really fortunately after 15 years of marriage finally I realized that after so many. But yeah, a little bit of both doesn't hurt, right?
Well, I can tell, listening to us 3 speak right now that we're all very grateful for the partners we have in our lives, and I think it's fair to say that we are beneficiaries of the people who have helped us build us who we are as leaders, and we didn't go travel this journey alone, and I think you're an embodiment of that, Aftab. Just pivoting a little bit, I'd like to understand, you spend a lot of time helping startups, either advising them or helping them grow their business strategy, et cetera. How do you think about the startup landscape? If somebody who, for example, wants to be an entrepreneur today,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
would you advise them to go about that journey? Is there a
Yeah.
starting point? Is there a middle point? How would you frame it for them and guide them?
Yes. So co- a number of things there. I think number one is you got this is probably the most important. You have to be all in. I don't. I don't. I haven't seen anyone who's 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You have to be extremely successful to move the needle, to build something transformative, et cetera, et cetera. Like you can't be your quote unquote side hustle kind of thing. Now, you can have a side hustle, and I'm not necessarily saying you shouldn't, but if you want to build something transformative, do something that's going to be large. It can't be, hey, I'm doing it part time kind of stuff. So that's the first. And ironically enough, a lot of startups, that's particularly cyber startups that I've spoken to, have had a blessing of helping. The initial conversation for me is just that, like, if you're thinking about building something, like, when are you going to walk away and put some risks behind it? So that would be number one. And a lot of times you find that people they want a cake and eat it too, and which is fine. I respect that. We all have responsibilities and families, but it's hard to compete with someone else who's all in, who's breathing day in and day out their business that they're competing against you. So that would be number one. Number two is fall in love with the problem. Um, I think we glamorize too much around outcomes and valuations and all of that stuff, which is great. I think if the business folks or the investors want that, but you as an entrepreneur, I strongly believe that you have to fall in love with the problem, and ideally, the problem is something that you felt so extremely that you were compelled to go fix it because it just bothered you that much. Like I find that so the first combination is you have to be all in. The second point of it is this problem has to be so strong for you to go and go solve it. And then the third one that I highlight a lot is have a framework of how you think through signals. And so what that means is, inherently, like there's a really good book. It's called The Mom Test. Everyone, I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's a fantastic book. But it basically says that if you ask the right people, you're going to get the answer you're looking for. Right? Is this a good idea? Your friends will say, yeah, it's great. To ask your mom, what do you think she's going to say? No, son, no, daughter. This is a horrible idea. So what you take away from that is a very very important skill, which is how to sift through these signals. And like naturally humans, we have our biases that make it challenging to do that. So what I advocate for is what is your process to sift through those signals? When you speak to a potential client, how are you scientifically going through that conversation to map back, is this a pain? Is this not? Are they a fit? that signal kind of clarity is a hard skill. And if you come from like a really strong technical background, or if you haven't spent a lot of time with quote unquote potential customers, it's a very foreign skill. Right? So those are the three early phase, the organizations that I've spoken to. Those are the three things that I'm super 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 like these three things have to be in place. And then the final piece, which is again, if those three are there, have an insight, not an idea, right? And then an idea is I'm gonna make this shoe better because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, great. I'm sure you can. But an insight, the subtle difference is the existing shoes are deficient A, B, and C, and that those shoes are deficient, and these are fundamentally deficiencies that cannot be solved by the existing shoemakers or the way the market is moving because people run differently or don't run as much. Like that's an insight, and that insight drives you to go find an idea that then needs to be solved. There's a subtlety there, but I find that if you coin it or you frame it in that regard, it unlocks the mental clarity that's needed for really cyber startups to go out and be successful. So that's what I share, and I mean, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that. But I'm more than happy to help folks like dive into that and like be a contrarian, things like that, if they have an idea. Because I think if you stress test it enough early on, it saves you a lot of pain and suffering.
That is, I appreciate how actionable you've made that. I think those examples and the way you framed it is absolutely wonderful. I'm gonna swing you back now to the other side in the corporate because
Yeah,
I think this
yeah,
is a
of course,
good segue into what we alluded to earlier in the show, which is the hyperscale bit. You were at one point the head of security for TikTok, and not too many people have operated at that level. So, using what you just shared with us, how does that differ broadly when you're operating at that scale in an if I can use the word geopolitically charged company,
for
at
sure.
one point? What were some of the lessons you learned there that either complement or contrast or maybe transfer to the skills you've just now shared with us?
Yeah, so TikTok was a very different beast. There, I was part. I got a chance to run one of many programs. So at the scale we are, it was pretty impressive. But couple of transferable skills. I think the critical thinking aspect of the signal matching was very important, particularly when the the one the one lesson I walked away with from that role was just it was a truly global company. So we would have meetings with folks in Asia. I mean, like you name the country, the organization had an office there. And so what I learned very quickly is that culture matters, like the sensitivity to the cultures matter. Not in the sense to where you want to be mindful of, what you say or anything. I mean, that's just a respect thing. But what I mean by that is different cultures, there's thrust to move forward at a certain pace that requires different knobs that you pick and choose. So that's the signal portion of it. Early on, I'm like, working mainly for US based companies, and I know how to get the workforce here, ignited, invigorated, and moving. But then now we're dealing with folks and say like Singapore, for example, like there's a subtlety there. Like I had to interface with some team members in China, in different parts of China, uh, parts of the Middle East, right, South America, right, like and inherently tech brings us all together. But like as you're working as a leader, if they're in my organization or if we're trying to get someone to move forward on an initiative or a project that's, in a different organization, the culture dynamics do matter. The other portion of me, like being all in, like, dude, talk about 24/7. Like at any given moment in time, I had team members who were up and working. And so the need to be fully all in, I learned that the hard way. And it was not only about just my time and, taking calls at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 10 at night. There were times I was putting my kids to bed, had, trying to kind of nap. So being all in, I mean, that it did require that. And I learned a valuable lesson in that. Like it was tough it aged me, um, because of it, but, it did also teach me that there's different okay, there's different levels to this,
Mhm.
and until you see it up close and personal, you'll never really realize what that looks like. And so I thought I was moving at a certain pace, and I thought I was, at being able to execute at a certain level, and then you see this, and you're like, "Holy moly, I I'm going at a 20 and they're at 150."
Mm.
And that again highlighted what I was saying earlier, that you gotta be all in, because you're all in, even that may not be anywhere close to your competitors all in. It was eye-opening. It was good, and I think, but once you see it, you can't go back now.
Mm.
And like,
Yeah.
um,
Aftab, I can relate to what you're saying. I lead the reliability engineering organization for one of the payments networks.
okay.
Um, and I understand 24/7, 365. And Renard's heard me, say things from time to time. I won't get into specifics. I see him nodding over there. So, it's, but I want to ask you about influence at that scale. It looks very different. I know it, but I'd love to have your perspective too. How do you influence in an organization that is truly global, as you've described, at the level where you have tremendous global and even potentially geopolitical impact? How did you think about influence? What has it taught you?
Honestly, this is where I think some of the core tenets of disinfluence really matter. And I think for me, and it actually, maybe maybe it's just a function of just my personality. But for me, I've always viewed it. Influence is a function of how you can share a narrative of why something needs to be done that'll benefit them. Right? Like, it's easy to show up and say, "Hey, we need to do X because I have this KPI or I have this metric, I have this project that needs to be successful." Like, the hard part about it is telling Renard, "Yo, man, you should let me borrow your car because I'm gonna go wash it for you. I'm gonna fill it up with gas. I need the car. I don't want to show up and say," right. So then there's this powerful clarity that you have to have in terms of why anyone, whether that's in a small organization, large organization, needs to set out time, resources, mental cycles to then go on a journey with you. And you'll have friends who'll say, "Yeah, man, I'll do anything to help you," and that's great. But those things happen far and few between for the most part. You have to have a really clean narrative around, "Hey, Bernard, I need you to let me to borrow a car because of A, Y, and Z. Amir, you should let me house sit because X, Y." I mean, it can't be because I need it, and I think that skill is not easy. But that framework, that mental viewpoint is what helps. And so now, if I were to show up to you or an organization with an initiative, and I have a clear value proposition of why it's relevant for them, then the easy part comes in. We now have a shared incentives, right? And so I find that that's a really, really, really strong and powerful way to get folks to join. And I always say to join on the security journey with you.
Yeah. Just to put a finer point, Aftab, because I hear a connection here. You started us out earlier with trust, and I'm hearing the way you're describing influence that they both complement each other. So I just wanted to put that out there for leaders who are
Yeah,
listening.
yeah, spot on. Good signal matching, by the way. Yeah. And
Thank you.
man, when I was early in my career, I would read a ton of books on leadership. And like, I spent a whole host of time, like, what's it mean to be a good leader? People tell you this and that. And then over time, I was so confused. I was like, shoot, man, I can never be that, because there was like 50 things you needed to do. And like, I don't know, I've always had imposter syndrome, and so I was like, dude, I don't think I can do it. And then as time goes on, I had a realization, and maybe you guys would echo this. Like, like, we make it more complicated than it needs to be. Right? There's some really core tenets that if you index on, right, like we talked about, all the other stuff, I want to say works out, but it's a lot easier. So I'm not saying these leadership classes aren't important, because they do help. trigger the mind to think a little differently. But these core tenets that I think are very, very easy to do, whether you're an IC even, hold true regardless of the size of the organization you're in. Um, and so there's that frame. What is it? KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid. There's a lot of beauty in that. There really is.
Yeah. It's something I've firmly believed in now that I didn't before because it didn't dawn on me that such a simple idea like this should have been obvious. But the idea is that, the mind is capable of going from one point to another rapidly. So we, each of us, have that ability to do that in our own minds. And to your point about leadership books, that's the equivalent of being able to travel from our mind to somebody else's mind and back, which is physically impossible. So to your point, that you should be able to find those core values, let those books or ideas trigger you, but make them your own, I think is really the value that I've gained at least. So that's the helpful piece that I learned, a few years ago.
And listen, I want to jump on that because I think there's a portion of it that you said, like no two leaders are the same. There's no like monolithic way of doing it, and so there's tenets that are helpful, but at the end of the day, you have to be. People could. I grew up in a town where we had really strong opinions on this as a kid, a youth, but like people could smell a fake from a mile away. So being inauthentic is not gonna, but just being authentic to who you are and then accentuating that with these core tenets. Like at the end of the day, like a leader's job is to get as much as he or she can out of their team, or get them to move in a certain get everyone on your team to move in a specific direction, right? And you and I can all do that. Anyone can do it with enough training, but doing it, being authentic to who you are is a lot easier, and more folks will come on that journey with you versus you putting up a persona or a facade and try to do it in that way. So you're spot on, but don't ever lose the intimacy of who you are. People can smell that a mile away, and like in front of your face, they may not tell you, but behind the back or like at the water cooler, the comments that are being made about you are not. I'm speaking from experience. Yeah. So that's the part that I tell anyone that even I mentor or I think could be a leader, like never lose who you are. You don't have to be me 2.0, or you don't have to be, no, you just need to be the leader that you are. But I can't help you identify what that is. I can help once you have clarity in terms of that, then I can help give you support to continue to accentuate that. So
So I like to borrow words from David Brooks, eulogy virtues versus resume virtues. And I very much am firmly in the I want to make sure that my eulogy virtues are what people remember me by.
love that. I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah. And I don't know, man. Going back to the whole people thing, if you are authentic, I'm drawn to people who I fear who are sincere, right? And my experience has been the same. And that has an impact on not just your professional career, but your emotional psyche and also your personal life. If you build bonds with folks. I was just on a call with a friend that I met 15 years ago, 12 years ago. He was a contractor for where I was, and he and I have become really, really close friends. That that doesn't happen if I have a different viewpoint on it. He's done great in his career, and he's allowed me to help mentor him a bit. So yeah, so it has a wide range of benefits.
Yeah, I come from, of course, I feel like some of the things you're saying are the same things I grew up with. Like we used to say, I could tell if you're fake in the first the minute conversation you had with me. I could tell if I'm gonna be able to deal with you on a regular basis. I'm just like, nah, I got to move you on after that. So I feel the same way. I feel like you have to be authentic and be real because that's what people need in this world, especially when it comes to your professional life. I think a good leader is someone who is authentic and who is real. People gravitate to that person. People want to work with that person and also learn from that person as well. So, and going back to an earlier statement, you said when you got to TikTok and you found how fast they move, etc. I found the same thing out in my current job. I thought I moved at a level until I started where I'm at now, and I was like, "Holy shit." I say either I gotta catch up or I'm gonna get knocked off this bus. But like you said, once you're there, you can't go backwards after that. So I feel like, in a sense, I wish more people would almost, in a sense, intern at big hyperscale companies and understand that fast pace. Because once you understand it, you can go anywhere and be able to produce that after that, because you don't wanna go back to the moving at that speed you're used to, if that makes sense. So, of course, since we got tech people on here, we gotta talk about AI. It has to happen since we got tech people, and I'm kinda curious, of course, now we got Claude. Claude has Mythos. Security is more important than ever than it used to be. What's your thought around the landscape of where we're going? I'll give my opinion before you say anything. I feel, from an AI standpoint, we moved too fast, because that we're humans at the end of the day. Once we do something, we're like, man, we got to improve upon it real fast, and we're
Yeah,
moving so fast. So I'm kind of curious from your thought in where AI is going and how fast we're moving. What's going to happen with security along?
yeah. No, everything's being challenged, and I think so. Yes, we are moving fast, and some primitives that we or assumptions we made 3, 4 months ago are no longer valid. So the pace, but okay, the pace is fast, and there's challenges to it. Personally, I enjoy it. I like being uncomfortable. I like being in that space where you don't have the answers. I mean, it really challenges you, but also some of your best thinking will come out of it. So I think it's fantastic. Security is going to have uh, a disruption. What security looks like, how security teams are going to function moving forward. What is the role of security? I can see a world in which security is not a standalone function any longer. It's just embedded into all these different places. So there's a lot of unknowns, but pace and velocity is the two things that really stick out to me. How fast things are changing, but the velocity in which the technology is growing, the use cases in which you know the AI can now address at accuracy levels are just fantastic. But what that also brings is a lot of opportunity, right? People to reshape, their career, organizations to reshape how they look at value generation, how technology becomes an even additional force multiplier to the business. Right? And these are conversations that all technical folks should be having, particularly the last one, because one thing that I zero tolerance, but one thing I don't tolerate, and this is where I think I counter my contradiction. I don't tolerate folks on my team who don't understand why you exist from a business perspective. Right? Like I don't. It really bothers me when folks say, "Well, I just do security," or "I'm just a developer," or "I'm just a network guy." It's like, no, you're not. You're a cog that also really helps the business do something. You need to make sure you're that. And if you need me to draw that line for you, I can, but don't ever forget that, because you're not here because you're a developer, right? You're here because the business is selling something or providing some service, and you're a piece of that. So, what now from the AI age, if now if you have that lens, it doesn't matter what role you're doing. You're just thinking about how this technology could affect that. So, in general, I think it's fantastic. A lot of opportunity. There are going to be some pain we're going to deal with, because with any shift or any type of fundamental, I would say, reset. Um, I mean, Michael Jordan had to go through tons of practices before he became great. I think it's fine. So I think it's fantastic, and I'm looking forward to like some of the areas that get disrupted. Because going back to what I said earlier, like I've written several papers of my thoughts over the course of the last 6 months to a year, of where I think this shift will happen and what are the changes. I'm curious to see where I'm wrong,
Mhm.
right? When ChatGPT first was delivered, what did I think and why? Are the frontier models gonna, generate the most value, or the wrapper of technology? So that stuff is fascinating to me. And then on the security front, like, what are the areas that end up being the most impactful, and why? So, but it's a good time to be in the space. A lot of opportunities for those folks that are thinking about building. There's no better time, in my opinion, to take that leap.
Mm. I agree. That goes back to my comment when I said the CISO is the most hated, but also the most sought after right now
Yeah.
because of where we are at the same time. The CISO is highly sought after right now. So I'm kind of curious of the thoughts you have on just we talked about AI at the same time, but we have a lot of startups, and you talked about startups earlier. But is there enough room for all these AI startups that are happening now? We got
No,
one popping up every day at the time. What does the landscape look? How's that going to clear, and what's that going to look like? From what do you think it's going to look like?
no. To answer the question, no. I just, and I think it's a function of two things, right? Like, um, I think the investment tends to, the investment in tech, in some shift in technology ends up happening sooner than the market catches up to it, right? So what that means is we'll make a lot of assumptions in terms of how big the TAM may be, or I think the market will be for something. The investments will be 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 made based on that, with the anticipation that the market will catch up. Now, the question always is like, does the market catch up? Does it not? What reason? And I think in quote unquote security, there was you know AI created a whole new attack surface that becomes available to the organization. So we in security, we particularly on the startup side, we love attack surfaces because that becomes value that we can provide. Question now is what the prioritization of those attack surfaces look like, and like what's going to be the willingness of organizations to actually pay, right? Because it's one thing to say I have a problem, and another thing to say I have a problem and I'm willing to pay to solve it. So I think if I'm being completely transparent, there's way too much. I think there's gonna be a contraction. I think you're going to see a lot of firms end up. I'm going to say disappearing, but it's going to be challenging for them because the budgets haven't unlocked yet. And then not even just the budget. I think just from a security standpoint, like where do you want to make the investments, right? If you're sitting back and saying, okay, 3 years from now, can I, as if I'm building my security program, what are the areas I want to put some dollars behind and why? I don't think there's clarity there. No one knows from I so you can hedge and say, well, I'm going to put some dollars here, dollars there. And a lot of my CISO friends have basically said, like, I'm not signing a more than 1 year contract with anyone. And the contracts that I have in place, SaaS included, my renewals are going to be for 1 year. Why? Not because they don't believe in the technology, I just don't know where the investments will be.
Mm,
Like
I
now,
agree with that. Yeah.
yeah. So now your startup, like, okay, you live and die by the ability to sell. So, but there's a lot of problems. That's one thing I will say, and there's a lot more problems than folks even realize. So, but yeah.
I agree. We kind of we of course everybody talks about the dot-com boom, same
Hmm.
thing. Even one that we went through, next gen antivirus went
Yeah.
on for a while. Everybody popped up, everybody's next gen. I think I talked to either you or me or someone else. I said the two biggest Semantic and McAfee were the two biggest as far as AV is concerned, but they weren't the first to market. And they got in the now no one even talks about them anymore. It's almost like they still exist, but no one says anything about the two biggest players at one point. So I think in this AI, the thing's gonna happen. We're gonna have a lot, and then the dust will settle, and then you'll find out who will still be around at the end of the day, and that's where the money's gonna go for the most part. Amir, I'm kinda curious, what you think.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with everything that's just now said. Part of me has been thinking about, the open source models today, given that the frontier models have a big dependency on the data centers, and I don't think there's enough compute in the world today yet. And a lot of people are going to lean towards open source models to see what they can get away without paying the fees of the tokens. Because ultimately, it's now boiling down to your cost of tokens, which is really the cost of doing business now. So if I'm a business today, in my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to use a combination of open source as well as these frontier models. So for tasks that open source models are good enough, I'm going to try and save my pennies there. But then where I need the frontier models, I'm going to go ahead and pay that cost for the tokens and so on. Um, who's going to come in as an integrator to bridge the two and make it seamless, I think is going to be an interesting space to watch out for, because that really hasn't been something we've seen yet in the marketplace. And Aftab, you probably are closer to this than any one of us.
No, you're right. I think the economics for the adoption of the technology are now being questioned, right? So a year ago, every probably 8 months ago, but a lot of the talk was how do you become AI native, and the answer to that is just throw AI at it. So what does that mean? I don't know, but folks who did it had a viewpoint on it. But what I saw, what it meant was tokens usage, and so everyone just said, my team's using all these tokens. And I still don't know what that means, but a lot smarter people than I probably do. What they're finding out is that just because you're using more tokens, or there was another metric that I saw, development teams like we are now delivering X more lines of code than we were before. Again, I don't know what that means. It just means that one number is smaller than larger, but that to me doesn't mean anything because I don't the context behind it could be weak. And I think what's happening now. Oh, one last data point before I close the loop on the conversation. And also we were what was happening was the measurement for the adoption and usage of it was never really there was never really a clear baseline for it, right? So like how do you know you got better if you don't really have a baseline? So I was on a panel discussion. I asked this very fundamental question, like what's the baseline for an enterprise to then say AI native has maybe X more productive or we've generated X more value. The problem with that is that we didn't live in a world where we measured some of this stuff because there was no AI. So like the baselines were always screwed up. So now there's these vanity metrics that folks have used to pat themselves on the back. And tip my hat to you, that's great. But as they say, right, you gotta pay the bill at some point. And now the bills are showing up. And McKinsey just had a report. I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was really insightful. They said, like, certain tasks that AI is using a human's actually cheaper. I think it was like 73%. If I remember the research. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Hmm.
And okay, great. If that's true, then maybe more lines of code, maybe more token usage wasn't a good idea. Right. So the problem there is, look, this technology is fantastic. Amir, to your point, there's a place for open source models to be task specific. But I have a little nuanced opinion on it. Like, when does automation become AI and vice versa? Right? Like, there are a lot of startups that I've spoken to who are literally putting so many guardrails in place for their AI system to function a certain way. Like, I asked one founder, I said, why don't you just create instead of using a model, just create a systematic, basically bunch of nested if statements to just do this. Like, my point being is that you can get this done via really, really, really powerful deterministic software versus using LM. And so there's a lot of, I think, uncertainty. I mean, sorry, a lot of confusion around what AI actually is. And these conversations will now happen more in depthly because do you guys remember during the cloud days
Hmm.
where everyone said we need to move into the public cloud? I had kind of started my career early in those days, so I was part of some of those conversations, and like organizations just threw everything in the cloud, and then AWS and started to say, "Here's your bill." I'm like, "Holy shit!" We should probably bring this back because and then you start seeing like what's that hybrid look like, and I think we've seen this story written before. The CFO or your controller is going to show up and say, "Hey, this is not sustainable. Justify it." And then you're going to see very more targeted, more specific use of the technology, and I think you'll start seeing a lot more balancing of where it actually works well and in areas that it's just not suited for today.
Aftab, I think we've all seen this movie before, and coming out of the valley, you build ideas, you make people efficient, and then once you've captured the market, you raise the bill.
Mm.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and look, at the end of the day, that's what drives this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies is Avatar. I don't know, there was a scene in there where he shows the unobtainium. And he had to remind it was like the guy was pretty frustrated and he was like, "This right here, this is the whole reason this all exists. So let's not forget the reason why we're here is to, it's to capture this material like in the business. The whole point of it is to make profit, drive value, like not to consume AI, right? I mean that can help, but that's not the reason you're there. And so there needs to be a recalibration in terms of like how we adopt and where we adopt it. And I advocate avoid it unless you have intimate clarity in terms of how you're going to get the value from it. And I'm not saying avoid it like don't make it a priority because I those are two different things. It is a priority, but the assumption going in is why should I not use it here, right? And then work from that first principles. And then if you land to where it is beneficial, then you know floor to the yeah, pedal to the floor, let's go. But it shouldn't just be thrown at it because my executives or the board is telling we have to adopt AI. I just think that's a recipe for failure.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Aftab, we are running long, but this has been such a great conversation, and I wanna be respectful of your time as well. We do something on this show towards the end. We call it the lightning round, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask my friend Renard to kick us off here. Renard, could you do the honors for us, please?
Yeah, yeah, I'll start off. I actually thought of one while we are having this conversation. I'm kinda curious, Aftab, if you were not doing security, you could go back, what would you be doing if it wasn't security?
Oh, this is easy. Be a college professor teaching philosophy. Um, a free time. That's where I spend my time. I really enjoy it. It's in comparative religion, to be really honest with you. Like I just am fascinated by yeah. So yeah, you would see me at a campus, probably mm, having like really intimate conversations with my students and challenging their existence. Yeah, that's what I would be doing. And maybe if I retire early, I'll do that. That. My wife always says your students will probably get annoyed at you, but it's fine. But she always says, you're fun to be around initially, but after a while you wear on people. So maybe like the first week or two, the students are by the end of the semester, they're like, yo, man, this guy's crazy. Yeah, that's what
I
I
can
would be
see
doing.
myself doing that too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just some beautiful about being in that environment. Being around young adults in that phase of their life. It's it's enjoyable. But yeah, I just really enjoy philosophy. It's really, really, really enjoyable.
Alright, Renard, what do you got for us, my friend?
Okay, you want me to do another one? Okay, I thought you were gonna chime in. What is the best security lesson you ever learned outside of security?
Wow. Security lesson that I learned outside of security. Okay, I'll tell you. And it came up again just recently. Just do the simple stuff. Do well. Um, just do the simple stuff well. I'd say, uh, my wife called me and said, "Hey, you forgot to lock the front door." I'm like, "Okay." She's like, "We have cameras and we have alarm systems." She goes, "None of that stuff matters. You don't freaking lock the doors and close the windows." I'm like, "You're right. Do the simple stuff." And in cyber, it's true. It's true to blocking and tackling. I think we get so, enamored with some of the other stuff. Just do the simple stuff well. Ensure that and statistically, probability you'll be okay. Lock your front doors and close the windows before you leave the house. um,
That's the same thing they say in jujitsu. Like for us, do the basics well. If you do the basics well, even at a black belt level, it just looks amazing. Do the basics well at a higher level. So I get it, and trust me, I tell my wife, "Hey, make sure you lock the door too." I tell her that. I do. We got cameras everywhere, but like you just making it easy for someone to come in here.
yeah, yeah,
Lock
yeah.
the door. So
I
I do the same.
I just had that conversation last week, and look, it's not sexy, it's not pretty, it's not like innovative, but it's like I learned that the
Mm, okay. I got one more for you.
Sure.
If the CISO circle had a house band, what genre would they play?
A band?
Yeah, if your podcast, the CISO circle, had a house band, what genre would they play?
Okay,
Also,
so mhm.
what would you name the house band? I'm gonna add that on there too.
Oh, man, this one is harder for me, so house band. Look, I grew up listening to I grew up listening to Tupac and, like,
Okay.
in the '90s it was really influential, so for me, if I had a house band, probably, like, maybe, I don't know, maybe jazz or, like, R&B. Yeah. What would I name them?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, this one is hard. I oh,
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. If you have a name, it's okay.
my favorite peoples? I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. I like it. That's actually a pretty good name of a band, My Favorite
Yeah,
People.
my
No one
favorite
has ever
people.
done that. Okay. I like that. I like that. Amir,
Uh,
you got one for him, Amir?
Yeah, I'm wondering now, are you thinking that we should have a house band, Renard? I mean, it seems
Man,
yeah, you
fitting.
should. That would be
I'm
fantastic.
I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking it at all. We could have a house band.
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
But
Alright.
season 3, we having a house band then.
There you go.
Season
There
3,
you
house
go.
band.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, we'll put the name to a vote though, Renard. I don't know if,
Okay.
we're gonna do this
Okay.
now.
I like it.
Yeah, yeah. So, alright, off top, so you talked about security. What's the most overrated security tool in the industry right?
Say that again? What's the most what?
What's the most overrated security tool in the industry right now?
Oh gosh, this is gonna be hard for me. Overrated, there's a lot of them. I think okay, I won't name a single tool, but I will name a single, like, I think tools that provide just visibility. I made it a practice a few years ago, like, if you can't solve the problem you highlight, then I'm not interested, and I think that, um, it's the level and the bar that I've set in terms of my own frame of thinking, so anytime someone shows up me and something like, "Well, I'll tell you all the problems." Like, "Cool, man. You gonna fix them? Nope. Alright. Best of luck. Best of luck. Don't tell me what's wrong with my marriage. Help me fix it." Kind of. No, I have zero tolerance for that. Very direct and honest with anyone that I work with. Like, if that's your focus, I don't want to. I'm not saying anything negative of it. It's just not for me. And if you're asking me my personal opinion, don't tell me my problems. Help me fix it. Help me fix it with high level of accuracy. I would pay for that. Otherwise, I'm just not interested. I have enough problems that I have to deal with. I don't need you to add yet another one. So Hoverhive would be that any tool that does that.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Solve the problems, don't just tell me what they are.
Yeah. I mean, it's kinda it's always why am I gonna pay for it to tell me what I'm doing wrong? Like, I would pay for like, I don't know, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but, like, it just doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah. That's like going to a mechanic and he tell you got a problem, but he won't fix it for you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
"Oh, I looked at it, I just told you, but you gotta figure it out yourself." You're like,
yeah.
"Oh, I didn't know I had to be a mechanic as well in order to get this done, but thank you for letting me know about it. I appreciate it."
And you know what? It's funny because we were talking about this earlier. Like, that's the bar. I think early in my career, like, I think, okay, I thought that was normal. Then you see, like, I'll give you a really, really tangible example. And I know we're running over time, but I think this will be super helpful. So historically, vulnerability teams, you have vulnerability programs. They run scanners, they do testing, and then they create vulnerability tickets, and then they freaking give it to the quote unquote system owner or quote unquote code owner and say, "You go fix it." Okay, everyone I've hired to run a program, everyone I've worked with, that's the way we did it. I drove the TikTok. No, there are teams that are create the vulnerabilities and they have to fix them, even if the code is not theirs, right? And so I don't now. Some organizations may not have the luxury of that, but it was a very high bar, a different bar that I was like, wait a minute, this. can we do it? I don't know, but I like it. And so it was, for a long time, I just took it as just creating tickets and following up on SLAs is the way things were done, but there is a different level. So yeah, that's the area that I would have
All
over
right.
over.
Right after I'm going to ask you one. I'm going to ask my friend Renard to close us out on this lightning round. So my last question for you, sir,
Yeah,
is what is the one thing every CISO knows about, but almost no one says it out loud?
they're failures.
Mm,
And I'll tell you, I gave a talk and I introduced myself. They always tell you put an introduction slide there, which I don't know. I've always found that to be odd. Like I did this, I do that, I'm this. I always find that's a weird place to be in. So I try not to make it really slim. But I did a social experiment. So I put on there like all my failures. Like I was put on a PIP, I got demoted, I failed at this. Like I put a bunch of stuff on there. Like, okay, I'm sure people were thinking like, you picked this idiot to be a presentation. But get to the slides and afterwards, you give your talk and then it ended and you always get a number of people who will come and ask for clarifying questions, which is always really fun for me. But there was one young lady came and like, I don't say she was gonna cry, but like, she like, "Can I give you a hug?" I'm like, "Dude, it's great. I'm a hugger, so come on in. Let's do it." She gives me a hug, and I was like, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "Well, I really appreciate your presentation." And, I was in my ego at that moment. I'm like, "Yeah, you love my talk. We thought it was intellectual." She said, "Well, that's what I was thinking." She's like, your slide about the failures really, really hit me." It's like, "Whoa." She goes, I'm struggling in my current role, and I thought I love cyber, but I didn't think I was cut out for it." I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "It's my first job, and I've always wanted to do cyber, but I'm just not doing so well. And just see that you failed helps me realize that it's okay. This is part of the journey." So, you know, it like there's nothing wrong with highlighting or putting a spotlight on all the things you do well, but those things you do well are on the backs of all the thousands of things you screwed up on. So I don't think we talk about it enough, and we're vulnerable enough to do it. It's fine. Like you fail more time than you succeed. Like we should share with each other. So that would be it for me, Amir. Um, and it's powerful because I do think, again, it brings you closer to your teams. It brings you closer to people.
I must say, Amir, that's how you end that. No more question. That's how you end that. I love that last one. That one was that's as real as you can get.
Yeah.
They don't need to be any more questions after that.
I I agree with you, Renard. That's such a great answer, Aftab. And just to echo it one more time, I think failures is how we learn. And if
Yeah.
we don't grow from failures, then what are we really doing at the end of the day, right?
And the sad part about all of this is like we've we've created an environment where failure is not, quote unquote, in my opinion, it's not celebrated. You celebrate people for their successes, which great, but like their successes are, again, if someone was successful their whole life, I don't think they'd be able to change the world. If someone has failed more times than they succeeded, they're the ones who make it back. So yeah, man, I'm a strong believer in that. And
Love that quote.
it also gives me an excuse when I screw up in my marriage. So
Oh, I am wrong often.
like, this is the process, babe. It's supposed to work. Like, so, man, work with me here, man. I'm getting there. I always tell my wife, year 20 will be better. Just get there and we'll be fine.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. All right.
Yeah.
Well, with that, Aftab, thank you so much again for your time on the show. How can folks reach you? Tell us a little bit about your podcast, where they can find it, and so on.
Yeah, so the best ways to reach me, it's a cecilcircle.com. But they could just reach out to me LinkedIn, if you want. I'm happy to share my email. I love hearing from people. I love when folks connect and ask for help, or like, just to want to connect in general. I I I I get a lot of vendors who reach out to me to sell stuff, so please be mindful that if I respond, but if folks want to chat, just ping me on LinkedIn, man. I'm happy to schedule a call and just spend a little time or whatever. And so yeah, that would be probably the best way. Uh, and I enjoy it. I really, really do. It really, really lightens up my day when folks do reach out and just want to connect.
Well, Aftab, I really enjoyed this conversation today, and thank you so much for giving us your time. And
Of
to our
course.
listeners, I will ask that, if this conversation gave you something useful, here's what I'd like you to do. Leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast. It takes about 30 seconds of your time, and it helps more leaders find this show. And if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Hit like and subscribe. And if you know someone who needs to hear this conversation, please send it to them, because this gives Renard and I motivation, the energy to keep going and doing what we're doing. And that's how we grow. And with that, Renard, any parting words?
Like this podcast. This podcast is awesome. Like the podcast. This podcast is awesome. That's it.
Fantastic. And with that, we'll see you on the next one.